for those who don't know me, I think you pretty much all do. I'm Tom Wheelhouse. I run Mightify. Some of my team are here as well. So Kate, Peter Wheelhouse and Peter Weaver are all here from my team. So some of you might have met them at our previous events or courses, or would have worked with them one-to-one. So they're here to answer your questions and chip in as well. And then the main men of the evening are Paul and Dan. So I'm going to just quickly introduce them, but I'll let them talk through their own stories. So Paul was kind of an original Mightify success story, I think. Paul's probably been a few years now, doesn't feel like it, and moved from Thames Valley Police to Santander, where he's just gone exponential growth, I think, at Santander. So Santander is always a really popular destination for our clients. So Paul, putting you on the spot a little bit, could you talk us through yourself and how you got from where you first were when we spoke a few years ago to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. So as Tom said, my name's Paul. I used to work for Thames Valley Police for about 10 years. I joined in 2008. Probably similar to a lot of people, I spent about three and a half years in uniform, all at Milton Keynes, and then did my DCs. I worked in sort of priority crime, on the burglary and robbery teams, and lots of local drug crime, things like that. Did a little bit of sort of local surveillance OP work. Did a little bit in the child abuse investigation unit. Did that for about 18 months or so, and then moved back to what was called local CID at that point. I don't know if it's still called the same. Again, just more localized volume crime, robberies and burglaries and things like that. So my background necessarily when I was in the police wasn't financial investigation or financial crime investigations, but when I sort of made the decision that I wanted to, do something else and make that transition out of the police, I just decided to use all of the sort of skills that I had. Tom certainly helped me with that, but I placed quite a lot of focus in terms of what financial investigations that I did have that I could use for my CV. So I look back on my career in the police and focused on some of the better, perhaps fraud investigations that I did, any of the POCA seizures or POCA related investigations that I did, warrants, cash seizures, going to courts for the initial hearings and things like that, and made sure that I just highlighted things like that on my CV. I feel like that really gave me sort of a bit of an advantage, and it showed my investigation skills, and as well as I did have a bit of a knowledge, a bit of background in relation to financial crime as well. It was something that was at the forefront of everything that I did, even though I wasn't a financial investigator. So yeah, that's certainly. And then I went on from there, joined Santander. It's almost about 3 years now, and I joined as a SAR investigator. So within Santander, receive suspicious activity reports from all over the bank, conduct investigations and make a decision ultimately as to whether there's reasonable grounds for suspicion, as to whether we think it's money laundering or terrorist financing. And then we, if that is the case and we do have suspicions, make reports to the NCA, manage the risk around that. And one of the managers in the SAR unit, he went off to do a secondment. So that role came up. I applied for that. That was something that I always look back and didn't necessarily do enough when I was in the police, just put myself forward, put myself out of my comfort zone. So I thought I'd go for that when that came up. And I was fortunate enough with that. And that helped me get a little bit more sort of people management skills and experience. But when another recent job came up, when a new team had been created in the quality checking and training team, I went for that. And because I had a little bit of experience behind me, that helped me secure that role, which is about to start in a couple of weeks.
Fantastic. No, thanks, Paul. And yeah, I think you already answered one of the most popular questions that I've been asked before this event about having a financial background. So Dan has also kindly given up his time to join us. Dan and I originally worked together at Croydon and then on the TSG. So not an obvious financial background, I don't think, between us there. But Dan, if you could just sort of talk us through how you got from there to where you are now, having worked for some pretty big name banks along the way.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. If you can't hear me at any point, Tom or anybody, feel free to jump in. My connection can be a little bit touch and go up in the northeast. So as Tom alluded to, my background in the police was sort of 5 years, a couple of years in Croydon, 3 years on the TSG with Tom. I think you try and think about how does driving around in I guess a 3-ton truck with a bunch of your mates, ultimately having a great time and doing the cold face of public policing in uniform, how does that translate into financial crime? It can be quite difficult to try and make those connections in your head. So I'll try and sort of talk you through my journey, what I did, how I got to where I am. So to start off, I'm the head of financial crime and operations for a company called NSSL. We outsource to a number of banks. That's my current role. I'm moving on very shortly to a new bank to build a bank, ultimately, where I'll be taking on the role of money laundering reporting officer, MLRO, which is the appointed person under the senior management regime for money laundering or adhering to money laundering controls within a financial institution. So my journey, I guess, ultimately the biggest, most piece, which was making a decision to leave and translating in my mind why I wanted to leave. Everybody will be driven by different reasons of what they're attending this webinar for, what it is they currently do and what they want to do in the future. It may be clear, it may not be clear. Maybe as you've sort of discussed with Tom, you're trying to think, what else could I do? But for me, I was trying to, I remember talking to a friend of mine and trying to translate sort of what I do, what I'm good at, into what I could be good at and what I could do. And my journey took a slightly different route to board. So I started off in a sales role initially when I left the police. I did 2 years as an insurance broker. And the reason I got into that, or the way I got into that, was I remember talking to a good friend of mine and trying to tease out what I was good at other than being a police officer, which is very generic, but you are a police officer ultimately. And we're talking, he joked around, you know, I'm always chatting to people, I'm always making friends in the pub or making friends at the gym. I've always got something to say to somebody. Therefore, I'm obviously very good, or at the time, at building relationships. So as a police officer in particular, and I'll talk about that as my background, but in probably all of your jobs, those that are here, you quite often have to form relationships in difficult circumstances. In the police in particular, you have to build a rapport with somebody who's probably having a really bad day, and you're probably the last person they want to see. So therefore, you need to build a rapport with them. If you can do that and you can talk to people, build those relationships, ultimately you can sell them. So that's how I moved into sales. I found a role just by putting myself out to market generic sales roles. Now, I knew before that I wanted to move into banking. Unfortunately for me, and when I say banking, I mean anti-financial crime, I was too mature. Was the for a ultimately, I wasn't a grad with less than a year's experience, and equally didn't know anybody in a bank who could open the door for me. So I guess a lot of people listening to this webinar might be a step ahead of that. So there was nobody when I was looking to leave, nobody I knew of that was offering a repatriation service or anything like Tom and his team at Mightify are doing, helping people realize this. So you're one step ahead of where I was at that point in time. So that's a really good start. So when I moved into sales and insurance broker, I met a number of people. And one person in particular who stuck in my mind, a gentleman called Simon at the time, said, whatever advice you have or people give to you, if someone offers you to go out for a drink, go for a drink. He said, it'll help you move places in life. And what he meant by that was you'll meet lots of people. It's not necessarily going for a drink with that person. It's meeting who they interact with. Might be finding someone who's really interested and does something slightly different, and it rings a bell in your mind and think, oh, I've never heard of a job like that. So I was fortunate enough to go out drinking quite a bit, but to meet somebody at that point in time who was very high up in HSBC, Global Banking and Markets. And that gentleman was an ex-army officer, quite high ranking at the time. So he left the army, moved to HSBC and created a division that did customer due diligence, which was kind of the cold face of anti-financial crime. And he had a bit of an ethos that or mantra that I can train people to do this job. I just need the right sort of people. So I don't need someone with a financial background. I need someone who I can mold. And his army background sort of lended itself to people who were ex-forces, ex-police or other services, because he knew that there were people who weren't going to crumble under some pressure, you could probably lean on them quite hard and they'll deal with it there and then. They won't just crumble. But equally, it can teach you the job. It's the right sort of person. It's the work ethic. It's the way people are inquisitive. It's their tenacity, their willingness and need to learn and be better. So I managed to move into banking that way. And that was a long-winded way of saying that was my first job in banking. So I won't bore you with all the jobs I've done, but I would say I've managed to move upwards in my career quite exponentially via throwing myself in the deep end, learning as I go along, preparing as much as I can and do some qualifications, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But predominantly by giving everything the hardest go that I can and making it work, I guess, is what I'm getting to. But equally then, through the likes of networking, I'd say networking's been my best friend, LinkedIn in particular. Every move I've made has been a more senior move. And I think 3 or 4 out of the 5 last moves I've done are through either being approached directly or through me approaching someone on the likes of LinkedIn and asking them for a coffee and saying, you know, this is what I do, this is what I'm interested in. I can see you've got something in that field in terms of what they do. Quite often for me, it's make friends with someone who does the job I want to do, and they'll be more than happy to talk. People like to talk. I've been going on for 10 minutes now. People like to talk about themselves and their story. So by doing that, I managed to expand my network significantly. And that helped me move then upwards in my career in terms of seniority, but also then develop different skills along the way and sort of add some more variety.
That's fantastic, mate. Thank you. And yeah, I mean, loads of value in there straight away about the value of networking and the value of, same as Paul said as well, you know, put yourself forward for things, step out of your comfort zone, and the worst that can happen is, well, nothing bad can happen really, but both of you have progressed by doing that. Kind of leads us on to my first question really. Paul, is there kind of particular skills you think that Santander, in your experience, look for, or particular skills that you think have really been crucial to your progress since you left the police?
I think it can generally depend what level of role that you're going for. Certainly, if I could just talk about my own perspective, going from being a DC, moving over to being a SAR investigator, that kind of level, a lot of the skills that you'll naturally have as a police officer are completely transferable. And from a Santander perspective, and I'm sure it's the same for all banks in the financial investigation industry, it's going to be quite similar. So particularly around risk management. So anyone in emergency services will risk assess every single situation on a daily basis that they deal with. That's quite similar in financial crime investigations. You're managing, identifying risk and dealing with it, although it's just from a slightly different context, because you're managing the risk to protect the bank ultimately. But yeah, risk management is definitely a key skill, I would say, is transferable and something that is sought after. Decision making is definitely another one. Again, that's a key skill that police officers, emergency service staff people have. But not only just making the decisions or using information that you've gathered during an investigation, but then rationalising it. Similar in the police, if you conduct an investigation, gather all your evidence material, and then if you're going to do an MD3, MD5, you're detailing all of that evidence and then rationalising as to what you interpret it means. It's exactly the same in a financial crime investigation. You're making that decision using your judgment skills and then rationalising why you think it is or isn't suspicious. So a lot of those things are quite similar, I would say. Because it is a financial crime investigation, being able to interpret complex information, legislation. Again, police officers do that on a daily basis. That's something that is key to financial crime investigations. Managing your workload, prioritising different tasks around risks and different time frames. Again, in the police, you'll have different investigations of varying degrees of risk, and you'll manage them accordingly. So those are all key skills I would certainly say that would be transferable from going at that level for an investigator, financial crime investigator, looking at SARS or various other areas of the bank, looking at investigations. One thing that I would say from my experience, I've been quite fortunate in terms of, there was an opportunity that came up for me to get that people management experience and manage a team at Santander. I did put myself forward, but I was fortunate that it came up at that time. I would certainly say if it was similar for myself in the police, I was at a bit of a crossroads really when I was making that decision whether to leave or not, whether to sort of go for the sergeant's exam and then try and progress my career that way and get management experience. I'd certainly say if you're in that position, it would certainly be something to consider, because I do think that people key skill to take forward, and it will open up a lot more opportunities when you do make a transition to whether that may be whatever industry, if it's financial investigations or otherwise.
It's interesting. That's a really interesting point about that leadership stuff, Dan. Because obviously, when you left the police, and not in police terms in a leadership role, so did you find that was something you had to kind of add to another string to your bow after you moved, or how did you get around that sort of leadership element to progress?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't have any management experience. I moved into a specialist role, similar to Paul there, and had to learn the management piece afterwards. I found that really challenging. If I'm honest, I'd sort of owned my skills of what I was good at and really good at, and natural progression from there was to manage a team, whether it's that team or another team doing something similar or whatever it may be. And now I manage multiple teams. For me, the hardest thing was not just being a doer, having to coordinate. So I stepped into sort of typical financial crime manager type of role. And my job transitioned, and much in the way I'd imagine it does as a police sergeant. Let's say you do less of the doing, more of the coordinating. You're moving pieces around. And for me, the hardest bit was taking that step back from being the one person who does everything. So if I think about sort of operations managers, I recently recruited an operations manager who runs one of my financial crime teams. We just call them that internally. So as a financial crime manager, they didn't have necessarily the strongest financial crime background. They had some sort of awareness that they're basically ex-police, but they did have the experience of people management and ultimately moving resource around and making an operations run smoothly day to day. And that can be really difficult to master. And I found it a big challenge at first. I learned a lot about myself, my management style. I certainly thought I'd be a different manager or / leader to what I am. So I think if you do have the opportunity to do that, then there's certainly merit in it. However, it's not to say that you can't life and self quick examples.
And just following on from that a little bit on the qualifications, so kind of formalising those skills. So I think knowing some of the people that are on the call, and everyone's at a different stage. So if for people who haven't got maybe a financial background, whether that's academic or within the job, is there a way they can bridge that gap? Is that something that doesn't really matter? How can they best kind of use the skills they've got or the qualifications they've got to best sell that value into a bank or a financial institution?
So there's sort of two gold standard industry sort of qualification suppliers. I think best way to term them is the ICA and ACAMS. And Paul, you may agree or disagree which one's better, and further ones from there. So I think ICA for me is the sort of the standard that I look for. ACAMS is on a par. These are financial crime or AML risk-based professional qualifications. So if you're looking at a professional qualification, a vocational one, whether you can get sponsorship or whether it's a self-fund, they would be the go-to. However, as we've all discussed a little bit so far, I don't think they're necessarily a prerequisite. I wouldn't say that you absolutely need one. I'm one of our champions internally for our ex-forces recruitment, and quite often people won't have that exact qualification. We will then teach them the job, and we will teach them perhaps through qualifications, our own internal learning along the way. So I don't think it's a prerequisite. However, they are useful. I think it can often just help by learning from people people sort of gaining an understanding of what people do, how they do it. So if I was to talk sit down with a friend and talk them through what I do day to day and what that involves, that might give someone a good idea within a few hours for them to then go off and do some more research, follow webcasts. The Dark Money Files is something I follow, which is a sort of free webcast type of thing. There's a lot of information on the likes of LinkedIn where you can get a real understanding of financial crime, how banks identify, mitigate financial crime, as opposed to purely having to have a badge, i.e. a qualification. Paul, happy to hand over there.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I don't know of any other sort of educational bodies other than ACAMS and ICA. Similar to what Dan said, I don't think it's necessarily a prerequisite. It might be advantageous if you don't have any sort of financial investigation background at all. Something to look at, because that's going to highlight it on your CV perhaps to employers, to show that you've been proactive and done something off your own back to try and enhance your knowledge. I didn't have those qualifications. I don't know about other banks, but certainly in Santander, the ICA certificate in anti-money laundering, that is effectively a mandatory course that they will fund and put you on as a SAR investigator. And when you move up and you become people manager, then they'll fund you to do the ICA international diploma, which is something I'm about to start doing. So yeah, similar to what Dan said, I don't think they're a prerequisite, and a lot of the information that's within these qualifications certainly is available online. You can identify a lot of that information, that knowledge to give you a bit of a head start. If you reach a point where you get an interview with a bank, you can express a lot of that knowledge through the answers that you give within an interview. So yeah, so certainly nice to have, or could be advantageous, but it's about balancing it and weighing it up with the costs against how you can highlight and present other skills that you've got, as well as the qualifications if you don't have them.
No, that's excellent, and I think there's some really valuable stuff there about how you can be proactive without necessarily having to jump feet first into a retrain full degree or anything like that. You can actually equip yourself with a lot of the knowledge from podcasts, like Dan said, or from the stuff that's out there that way. Just on that point about professional bodies, is there anything in your industry that you think would be worth people joining or looking into, in the sense of networking groups or memberships, or is that anything you guys have found useful, or do you think that's a little bit of a red herring of wasting your time going to, not that there are face-to-face events now, but if there were networking events or conferences, is there any value in that? Paul?
I'm not sure from my own perspective, to be honest with you. There's certainly, from going on LinkedIn and following certain people, just keeping abreast of different changes in the industry, and how things are changing, how financial crime landscape is evolving, and just keep it on top of that. To my knowledge, sorry Tom, I can't think of any anything specific in relation to that.
No, that's good. It's perfectly good. I'm just trying to work out where people's efforts are best spent now in bridging that gap. And I think sometimes it can be easy to fall into the trap of going to a lot of events or spending a lot of time going to things that maybe aren't actually moving you forward. So it's useful to hear that you can do a lot of that stuff off your own bat rather than needing to be in costly memberships and things. I mean, Dan, did you kind of use any? Was it all individual networking that you mentioned, or was that through any kind of professional groups or events?
Sure. So I would echo Paul's response there. There are not any larger cohorts of sort of people and organisations that generally professionally network that I'm aware of within our specific field. One thing I briefly mentioned was the Dark Money Files, is a podcast I listen to fairly religiously. There's a bunch of guys who give out their opinions and quite a lot of information around financial investigations. As Paul mentioned, the landscape is changing. Everything's become more digital. COVID-19 has probably only accelerated our digital ways and means of doing everything. I mean, this call alone is a prime example of that. So by listening to podcasts, webinars, attending things like this, but also more specific industry ones, is a way to keep abreast of how, in our world, how criminals are changing their means of conducting money laundering. Ultimately, it's not the days of depositing suitcases full of cash in 10 different branches in a day anymore. It's all digital. It's opening accounts online. There's very little face-to-face contact at the moment, particularly at the moment, but in general, in how people consume banking. And therefore, with that lack of face-to-face interaction, there's that enhanced level of risk in terms of having, as a financial institution, having confidence with who you are dealing with in terms of KYC, know your customer, i.e. the person applying for an account is who they say they are, but also in Paul's world, these sort of SAR investigations. So people will conduct transactions online. People don't go to the bank anymore. Very, very little cash moves around in the same way. So everything's done with a tap of an app or something like that. And funds move globally all the time. And that presents increased risk to organizations, particularly in correspondent banking networks where there's multiple banks and financial institutions in the chain. So I would say just to try and stay abreast of how criminals are changing their means to ultimately launder the proceeds of crime.
No, that's really interesting. And Peter, bring in a second. It's really interesting because last week, when we were talking about cyber, the guys from the cyber security world said exactly the same thing. One of the best ways to equip yourself for a career in cyber security is to find out how criminals are doing, cyber attacks, and that's exactly the same things. And that's a really, really good thread. Pete Weaver, you were waving at me.
Yeah, I was just like to make one comment about what Paul and Dan have said, and then just ask a question as well, really. So the first comment is, people watching this, it was very interesting what both Paul and Dan said about what skills you bring with us, and it was the decision making, the people management, the leadership, the risk assessment, all those type of skills, all those skills that we have as police officers. And both of you, without any prompting, came out with all those things, which is really good, first of all, and shows the transferable skills. The second question, really, and this is from a totally different side, and Tom knows this is my kind of take on things, and it's a question for both of you, really. Perhaps start with Paul. Is there much opportunity for part-time, self-employed or contractual type work? Because there may be some people on the call who are actually thinking, I want a portfolio type of work after I leave where I am at the moment. Paul, over to you.
Yeah, certainly. There's in my team of 9 investigators. One of them is part-time, and she works Wednesday to Friday, and there's various other people that do part-time working, certainly around within the SAR unit where I work. That's very much encouraged within Santander. I can certainly speak for them. Really good with that side of things. And when you join after you do your sort of 6 month probation, then there's various different options where you can apply to compress your hours, which might assist with childcare or various other things where you let work longer hours on certain days to have a particular day off and things like that. There's a lot of flexibility around that. Certainly from the Santander perspective, very good employer from that perspective.
I'm happy to add to that, really. I think the days of perceptions of bankers sort of working 20-hour days, I think, is gone now. I think there's quite a realization across most organizations that that's not sustainable, nor do they want their employees to be doing that. So banking, it can be challenging at times, but it's not perhaps the beast it was at one point in time where it was long hours. So yes, there's flexibility in that sense. I've got a number of employees, from part-time workers, flexi workers, various across the varying teams that I've got. And I think, Peter, correct me, you mentioned about contract work. Is that correct? Is that one of your questions?
Yeah, it was just an inquiry whether that was a possibility or not, really.
Yeah, sure. So I take on contractors at certain points. Perhaps if we've got a piece of work that needs remediating, not so much in my current role. However, in a previous life at Deutsche Bank, I think I sat on a floor of around 300, I'd say 60% were contractors. Having said that, though, they were contractors who had quite a lot of experience.
Yeah.
So to move into, I guess, banking work is probably require a fair level of experience. Contracting itself can bring some flexibility, can bring some risk. It depends on what they're looking for in their career. Some people stay as a contractor for their entire career, some dip in and out in sort of response to need. But I guess in answer to your question, yes, there is certainly a need for contractors in financial institutions, and I think there will always be that need with the ever-changing legislative sort of landscape, horizon scanning, what new legislation is going to come in, even the likes of Brexit, changing the way we do things as of the turn of the year. From a sanctions perspective, I'll most likely take on particularly skilled sanctions contractors at that point in time.
Right. Thank you.
No, that's an excellent point, Pete. Yeah, and really good content on that. And James's question that he sent in, actually, I'm going to come to now, just because that kind of ties in where I was going to go. So, you obviously, here as kind of shining success stories of what can be done and going really well. But James hit the nail on his head with this question of, were there any setbacks or unsuccessful applications along the way before things started to come good for you? So, Paul, how did you find that initial journey?
I was really fortunate. It was with Santander. It was one of the first roles I applied for. One of the reasons was that because I really targeted that particular role. I knew that those roles did come up quite frequently, so I tailored my CV in the way that I was going to apply for that role specifically, rather than just having a generic CV and sending it to 100 different employers. I really targeted that role and made sure that my skills fit within the job specification, which I think was a good thing, and it enabled me to get an interview. When I went for the interview, I didn't know at the time, but there were a number of roles. I think there were 5. So they were expanding the team. There were 5 roles. So I was fortunate that was the situation, that there was 5 roles available. But you're not necessarily going to know that information when you're applying, unless you specifically ask in the interview and they're good enough to tell you. But that would be one of the things that I would certainly think about, is anticipate that there might be setbacks, because you might go for a particular role and you've no idea how many other people are going to go for it. You don't know their level of experience. It might be a situation where it's a big team, but there's only one role in that situation, and it might just be that someone with more experience has got the job on that occasion and you don't. I would say with that is to always ask for feedback in relation to an interview or any sort of setback that you do get, because you might apply again for the similar or same role 6 months or 12 months down the line, and at that point there might be 5, 6, 7 roles, and you don't know, and then it opens up more opportunities that way. So I was quite fortunate, but I feel like I did target particularly that role, so I did have any setbacks to start with. Since I've been at Santander, there was one other role that did interest me, and it was in relation to complex investigations. So there was some sort of comparativeness between what I was doing in the police, looking at something a little bit more complex in relation to financial crime. I applied for that, and I got a knockback in relation to that. There was only one role in relation to that particular job, and there was someone with more experience, had been at the bank a lot longer, and they were more suitable for the role. I made sure I just went and got really good feedback in relation to my interview and the application, and that was something that I was able to use moving forward into other roles, management roles that I've applied for. So although there might be setbacks along the way, just make sure that you use them positively, get the feedback, and use them for anything that you do in the future.
No, that's awesome. And Dan, did you have any setbacks in the early part of that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it can depend on your approach and how you go about marketing yourself or building your brand to get those roles that you want. So you could probably avoid what I initially did, which was I just scattergun my CV out to the entire market. Basically, when I made the decision that I wanted to leave the place, a friend of mine snuck me a bunch of emails who were sort of senior figures at large banks, clearing banks, trading houses. He was a stockbroker, and he gave me a load of details and said, "Oh, here's my sort of contact list. Tap them all up." So I wrote this generic email and had this really police-focused CV, and I just scattergunned it out across the entire market to about 200 people. I think I got one response, which was sort of one acknowledgement, I would say, which was kind of speak to HR, and that was about it. So absolutely got defeated immediately in my first month of attempting this and thinking I was going to get a role straight away in sort of some huge clearinghouse or as a trader or something like that. So that's probably something to avoid. Having said that, moving forward, I think, as Paul said, be more targeted. The advice that I would give myself would be to sort of transpose your skills into the language that matches the role you want. So if I'm looking for somebody to fill a role, I'll write a role profile, and there might be language in that is quite specific to what we do in terms of the way we describe investigations and describe financial crime and all that sort of stuff. But actually, if you translate that back to what people do day to day, networking, investigation, people who are not afraid to challenge, who are credible, who can converse, who can have a good level of literacy and really learn and absorb and translate what they do day to day into that comparable language, then that will really help. Be very targeted, I would say. Avoid scattergun approaches, and I think tailor. I don't know, most people say is tailor your sort of CV to every job you want to apply for. It might not seem feasible in all circumstances, but certainly get it to the right field of expertise. So if you're after a specific role, let's say, for argument's sake, a financial investigator. I'm not one. I run a team of them as one of my teams, but I've never done full-scale SAR investigations like Paul has. However, I know what I want from somebody in that. If that's what you want to do, then tailor your CV for exactly that role, using the language of what they do, but also the skills in terms of what you have done. So you've investigated crimes. If you're a police officer, you've done lots of things that might be very comparable, but just not directly translatable in sort of job speak if you're in that sort of role. So have I had setbacks? Yes. I think to echo what Paul said, be specific in what you want to do and what you're applying for. And if you get lucky enough to get an interview, put the preparation in, be really confident in conversing why you want to leave your job and why you want that particular job, because they're two very different questions. And I would always look, no matter what background somebody's coming from, I would want a confident answer on both of those, that they can clearly converse that with confidence and be challenged on that and know it inside out. Why they want to leave is not just because what they do is crap and they don't want to do it anymore, but why do they want to do this particular job? They're two very different things.
No, that's a really, really valuable point. I'm just kind of interested in the slightly different topic, that culturally. So, Paul, I'll come to you first. For Santander, you know as well as I do that half of Thames Valley Police probably have applied to Santander over the past few years. But the reason for that is that Santander has got such a good reputation as a place to work. We've had people who say they want to work there because every time they ask around at their kids' sports day, all the parents who get the day off for sports day work for Santander. So therefore, it must be a good place to work. So I'm just interested how you found the kind of cultural change from being a police officer through to where you're working now.
Yeah, the culture's certainly a lot different. I think it can depend on who your line manager was when you were in the police, as to how you find your line manager is when you move elsewhere. I feel I was quite fortunate. I always got on with my line managers and felt they were quite supportive, but others may not have felt the same way about other line managers perhaps. But going to Santander, straight away I felt supported. There's lots of flexibility. Whether it's sports day or you do need to go to another meeting, they'll allow you to do things like that and make up the time on another day, or take leave at short notice. So the culture is certainly different in that perspective. And I suppose just generally, and it would be the same anywhere you worked, I imagine, knowing your hours, that you're actually going to finish on that particular time. You're going to have the weekend off. That was something that probably is similar for a lot of people that are thinking about leaving the police, and certainly the same for myself. It was quite difficult, never really being able to properly plan your life, knowing that you're quite often going to be off late, or you might be asked to go into work on a weekend or be off late on a weekend when you'd had plans. So that's something, I suppose, not necessarily about the culture about Santander, but something that I always, wanted to get away from, and something I personally really enjoy now, knowing that you can manage and plan your life a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, within Santander, there's lots of different networks as well that you can get involved in, for various different charity events you can do. You can go away and do like organised charity away days, raise money for like the specific charities that are partnered with. There's lots of different things you can do. But yeah, the culture is really good. So everyone is certainly very supportive.
No, fantastic. Peter, you're waving at me. Go on.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, did you notice that to Paul and to Dan? Did you notice that in the interview process as well? Because I think a lot of people have the experience in the public sector of almost an adversarial interview process, and quite often in the police, an interview process that's around knowledge rather than about you. And my experience of the private sector is it's different, but I just wonder if you notice the difference when people are talking to you and when they're interviewing you.
Yeah, definitely from my perspective. So my only experience of interviews really for being in the police was going for a detectives board and doing that. And like I said, it's just about knowledge and being given a specific example and saying, okay, what would you do with that information? So didn't really know what to sort of plan for really when I went for my interview with Santander, but straight away they're more about the actual competencies and how you can showcase how you do manage risk and deal with different things within the core competencies. So yeah, it is quite different. They're asking you about you and about your personal experiences and the skills and experiences that you've got. They're certainly quite different, and they're definitely very interested. They're interested when I was talking about different examples that I had within the police and how I found or thought that it would be transferable into that role. They're certainly interested in that.
Yeah, I think the interview in the police were kind of, you had to have an example of something. That was kind of about it. It didn't have to be relevant to necessarily what you were going into. My current sort of career has seen a number of interviews where I've had to talk about specific scenarios, as Paul mentioned, specific things that translate into what you do or will do day to day. I think the interview processes I've been through as well can differ in terms of, it might be a written piece, it may be presentation. Quite often I've had to present to board members or prepare something similar like a board pack. Now that might seem a bit daunting, but ultimately it's no different to giving a police briefing. You just stood up in front of a bunch of people, telling them about something you're going to present on, and then sort of do your research from there. But I do think that people who aren't in the likes of the police or any other service are interested. I think people hear about your crazy stories. Yeah, that's fine. You might want to do that later in the pub and things, but actually people do have an interest, and people are looking to get the best out of you. I certainly am when I interview, particularly people from similar backgrounds, different backgrounds. I'm always trying to find what good things this person could bring outside of a qualification. It's great that someone might have a qualification in my field, but ultimately what else can they bring? I'm not after someone who can just study. I'm after someone who can execute and do the job efficiently. And it may mean that I have to train that person up to do a specific skill or have a certain skill set in terms of what they're going to be doing, but I've got the right person there who's willing to learn, who's going to try their best, who's actually going to be better at the job once they've learned it, as opposed to somebody who's not got those elements that I'm looking for but has a qualification.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting and really useful stuff. I've got one other question that was sent in before that I wanted to cover, which you guys are kind of already answering just by being here, I suppose. But there's a perception, I think, with a few people that if you want to work in finance and banking, it's very London centric, and all the main companies are in the city or in London, or there's an expectation that you will be. So I wonder, just on you guys' opinion, as two people who are working in finance and not in London, do you think that's changing? Is that going to carry on changing, or what's the opportunities across the country?
Yeah, sure. I think historically that's absolutely been the case a number of years back. The world is changing globally with digitalization, as I mentioned earlier. The fact that a number of people, possibly here, but across the UK, are working from home, kind of reduces those barriers for the requirement for a physical presence in an office, sort of at least 5 days a week anyway. So I was in London, absolutely. I moved out of London 2 years ago almost. And the organisation I'm moving to, albeit they're not based exactly in Newcastle where I live, they are sort of regional, but I won't be in the office any more than a couple of days a week at best. So I don't think it's quite as London-centric as it once was. I think if you can demonstrate that you have the ability to do a job efficiently, or as efficiently, if not more, from any location, then that's justifiable. And I think COVID-19's only accelerated that realization for big organizations. They don't need physical presence for the sake of it and huge overheads in London.
And Paul, have you kind of found any? I know you don't work in London, but have you found there's any Paul where you've thought you're missing out at all by not being in London?
No, I don't think so. I live in Milton Keynes. I never really fancied the commute, to be honest with you. So that was why I targeted Santander as a really, quite a large employer in Milton Keynes. Is probably why quite a lot of people, certainly working in Thames Valley Police, tend to be focused and apply there because there's lots of different roles and it's a big employer. But yeah, similar to what Dan said, really, I think from my own perspective, I've been working from home since middle of March. Our particular department is split across 2 sites in Carlton Park, which is near Leicester, and Milton Keynes. And with all the managers and investigators, there's about 80, 90 people. And almost overnight, the deployed laptops and other equipment, and the entire department has been working from home ever since then. And it's been quite the same for a lot of different business areas in Santander. At the start, it was obviously going to be temporary because it's just a response to the COVID situation. But now I think at director level, they're starting to have conversations and make decisions about how that's going to look for the future, really. And I'm not sure whether we are going to go back to the office or Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. I think it is really showing that we can be adaptable and can work remotely and still be as effective within our roles. I don't know for definite, but I think that personally next year and in the future is going to start opening up a lot more opportunities, really, where more and more organisations are going to wake up to the idea that they can have staff working remotely almost entirely if that's going to suit their work-life balance and their role, and they're still going to be able to carry out their role effectively. So that's all the roles are not necessarily going to be in London at that point, or if they are, if there's a lot more roles in London, it's going to open up opportunities for people that do live in other areas of the UK and not going to have to make that commute, or certainly not on a Monday to Friday basis, if at all, is the way that I perceive things going within the financial industry anyway. It's interesting. I've got there's someone in my team that is based in Milton Keynes. She started after the working from home situation, so she's been working from home entirely since she started. She's got her equipment, but she's never even met the team other than virtually. She's never seen what the office looks like, and because she's got friends and family down in London, she's actually looking to do the opposite and move down to London and therefore work remotely with her job in Milton Keynes. So it's like turn on its head a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and it totally backs up something Pete said earlier about the opportunity to shape what do you want your working week to look like and your location to look like, and factor that all in from the start. So you don't just have it led by the job you go for, but what do you want your life to look like as a whole, and I think there's more opportunity for work to put in with that. So just last chance, if you have got another question before we go, type it into the chat box in the next couple of minutes while I ask the guys the last kind of question each. So just for both of you really, Dan, I'll come to you first, but just if you had kind of 1 or 2 top tips for people looking to get into that industry, what are the absolute kind of top bits of advice you'd be giving them?
I would say have a, sort of to repeat what I mentioned earlier, have a clear understanding of what it is that you want to do. Moving into banking or even in financial crime can be in a number of things, a number of different skill sets. So I don't say, but Paul and I have very different skill sets and do different jobs day to day, but we both work under the same umbrella. So whether it's a generic move into this space or a specific role, get that clear in terms of what it is you want to do. If you don't know somebody doing it already, best advice I can give from my personal experience is network. find about people who do it, that particular job or work in that field. You may come across someone who works within that field but does a totally different job that you didn't even know existed. Being inquisitive, try and understand exactly what it is that people do, and then may trigger something. You know what, that sounds really interesting. So understand what it is you want to do. Understand what your drivers are for leaving your current role. That's a huge piece for me. And if you have the opportunity to just to learn some skills in terms of knowledge, follow some webinars, do everything you can, talk to the right people. I think, as I mentioned earlier, there was nobody that I was aware of doing sort of work that Mightify do now when I was looking to leave. So you're already one step ahead. But I think talk to people, understand how skills can be translated across, understand what it is that you might be really good at that you don't know because you can't think outside of what your current role is. For me, I didn't know I was very good at certain things. I was a policeman and that was it. So network and get clarity on what it is you'd like to do would be the best bit of advice for me.
No, it's fantastic. While you're there, I'll ask you Anthony's question just because it's relevant, because you said you do a lot of hiring. Is there any perception, negative or otherwise, about somebody leaving the police after 30 years versus people leaving earlier? Is there any perception there that you've come across?
Certainly not for me. No, I did 5 years in the police. Thereabouts. It makes no difference if someone's got 5 years in or 30 in terms of perception, other than what they might have done. If that person with 30 years can talk about a really detailed investigation type of role, then perhaps so. But tenure is not really a big thing for me. That I'd look for. It's kind of the skills of that person, what they can bring. That's important for me.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Paul, top tips for anyone looking to get into the industry from your perspective?
I don't want to steal your thunder, Tom, but just generally from leaving the police, I would say just have courage once you've made that decision. Take risks, put yourself forward. Anticipate there might be setbacks, but just take the positives from them and get that feedback, definitely. And I think make sure that the decision, when you do, if you do decide to leave the police, I suppose people leave for different reasons. You might be earlier on in your career or reaching retirement, but just make sure that you do have courage in that conviction. You do weigh up the pros and cons, and have a bit of a plan, and try and follow that as best you can, would be my best tip. And just to echo what Dan said, definitely networking. It sounds like a bit of a taboo word, really, and it's certainly something I didn't necessarily do or think about doing in the police. You naturally don't really network as such. But it can mean lots of different things. Even looking internally, I always think that's good advice, really, wherever you are, if you're in the police or working in a different industry completely. If you're not happy in your role and you think there's something else, then look around internally, because that might open up another opportunity. Or it could be if you're looking at moving from the police into the financial sector, but you don't have a lot of financial investigation experience, you could network internally and speak to the economic crime unit. Try and get more involved in financial crime investigations, volunteer to take on more fraud-related cases. Just things like that can really advance your skills and knowledge and experience that could use moving forward. So certainly networking both ways, internally and externally, that might assist you with your career progression.
No, that's fantastic, and really appreciate you guys' time. Thanks everyone for being here on the midweek. There are other things to do. If you have got sort of further questions or other things come up, by all means, if you drop me a line, I can speak to the guys in future and put you in touch kind of as appropriate. Everyone's now got a podcast to go and listen to for financial crime. So, no excuses now to say there's nothing to watch on Netflix, because you've all got financial crime podcasts to listen to instead. So really appreciate Paul and Dan's time and sharing that knowledge and experience. And for the rest of you who are here, we're going to be doing more in the series on all kinds of different sectors as well. So if there is anything you do want to know about, or any follow-up questions that pop into your head, you know where we are, give us a shout. And I hope you found it all useful. So thanks again for your time, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one.